Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar on cybersecurity law that we're hosting here at the University of Maryland, Carey School of Law. My name is Markus Rauschecker. I am the Cybersecurity Program Director at the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. This center, or CHHS as we call it for short, is housed within the law school. And we provide a variety of services with respect to emergency management, public health, crisis management, and cybersecurity to our clients that come from both the public sector, so government, as well as the private sector businesses. I want to talk to you today a little bit about our cyber law program here at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law. Talk to you a little bit about why we started the program and tell you more specifics about the program itself, and then also answer any questions that you might have. So here at Maryland, we've had our cyber law program for over 5 years, and one of the reasons we decided to start a cyber law program is because, well, really hardly a day goes by when we don't hear about another cyber incident. I would suspect you would agree that you see these headlines on a daily basis almost in the news or on TV. And some of these incidents, some of these cyber incidents have been pretty severe, and they're very concerning. And years ago, people used to think about cybersecurity as just a technical issue. So whenever there was a cyber incident, it would be kind of shuffled off to the IT folks in a business or in a government department, and the expectation was that those technicians, those IT folks, would handle the issue and handle the incident. And over the years, it's become more and more apparent that cybersecurity is not just an IT issue anymore. There are a lot of people that need to get involved when it comes to protecting against cybersecurity incidents, and also then responding to cybersecurity incidents. And one of the areas where cybersecurity has really exploded is in law, in the legal profession. As we are seeing these incidents, like the big ones like Target or Home Depot, Sony, and most recently Equifax, there are a lot of questions about the legal ramifications of those incidents and the legal responsibilities associated with those incidents. What should those companies that were hacked, what should they have done to protect themselves and their customer data? What are the standards that exist? Are there any standards that exist that should be implemented? And after that, we see these lawsuits starting up. After an incident, it only takes a little while until a class action lawsuit is filed. And the question becomes, what are those lawsuits based on? And how can the victim company protect themselves against those lawsuits? These are all questions that have been emerging over the past several years, and it has given rise to a great need in lawyers who understand these issues and can deal with these issues and be involved. So I think it's become very clear that cybersecurity is no longer just a technical issue, but it will involve people from all sectors, certainly the legal sector. But if you're thinking about a company, everyone in that company now has a responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is now often referred to as a C-suite issue, meaning that the CEO and other leadership in the C-suite of a business has to be aware of cybersecurity, has to be aware of the organization's responsibility with respect to cybersecurity, and has to have an awareness of how to respond to a cybersecurity incident should it occur. So leaders of companies and certainly leaders of government organizations and agencies are very much attuned to this cybersecurity problem, and everyone is thinking about how to tackle this problem and how to respond to this problem, because it's certainly a problem of immense scope. It's a problem that's growing on a daily basis, and it's a problem that's not going away anytime soon. to give you an idea of how great this problem really is, I want to talk a little bit about some of those issues that are associated with cybersecurity that you may or may not have thought of right away when you hear the term cybersecurity. But obviously, as the world becomes more and more connected, as our devices are more and more connected to the internet, I mean, nowadays we have thermostats and refrigerators and in cars, they're all connected to the internet these days, it seems, and that is a trend that's continuing. But as everything is becoming more and more connected, and as we rely more and more on the internet and that connectivity for all kinds of things, we certainly become more vulnerable too, because these cyber attacks are not stopping, they're growing, and the bad guys are finding new ways to exploit our vulnerabilities. So there's all kinds of threats out there and challenges that we have to confront, some of which can have very, very serious consequences. We certainly hear about the data breaches all the time, and that is very concerning, of course, because our personally identifiable information, like our security numbers and our home addresses, our names, and all kinds of personal information gets revealed and is out there now. But there are other considerations in cybersecurity as well. One of the most troubling ones and scary ones really is the vulnerability of our nation's critical infrastructure. What do we mean by critical infrastructure? Well, basically all the things that we need for our daily lives that we rely on for to live. For example, our electric grid, our power supply, or our utilities like water utility, or our transportation sector. How do we manage our transportation, both our aviation, but also our cars and our trains? All of these sectors are becoming more and more connected to the internet, and there's a real fear that at some point someone might exploit that connectivity and cause some serious consequences to our livelihood and our public safety. Just imagine if there was a successful cyber attack on the electric grid and power goes out for an extended period of time. Think about what that means and what kind of an impact that would have. At this point, lives are at stake. So we as a nation have to figure out what should we be doing to protect our critical infrastructure and make sure that if there are any vulnerabilities in the connectivity of that critical infrastructure, that we address those vulnerabilities. Perhaps that means we need more laws or greater regulations, but then there are also, of course, arguments against that. So these are debates that are going on right now, and people are trying to figure out exactly what should be done, especially from a legal and a regulatory point of view. Speaking of regulations, we have seen that over the past few years, regulatory agencies in the government are asserting themselves more and more in the cybersecurity space. So agencies like the Federal Trade Commission or the Federal Communications Commission have engaged in regulatory action against businesses and other organizations when those agencies have felt like the businesses or the organizations have not done enough to protect themselves or their customers' data. When that started happening, when those regulatory agencies started going after businesses certainly took note. And then they started being concerned and asking, well, what can we as a business do to protect ourselves against regulatory action? So there's a whole bunch of work that has taken place already and is still taking place to outline the regulatory expectations, figuring out what the regulations are and what they obligate a business to do, and then how you could respond and protect yourself against regulatory action if you are a business. There's a lot of questions out there, and businesses need help answering those questions. And again, that's a job for lawyers. Lawyers who understand cybersecurity and the threats that are out there and legal and regulatory framework surrounding cybersecurity can really help businesses and the government, for that matter, in figuring out some of those questions. From a legislative point of view, we certainly have Congress, who's very aware of the cybersecurity issue, but even though there have been a lot of calls for greater legislation, more legislation in cybersecurity, legislation that perhaps would create some sort of comprehensive standards framework, which the private sector would have to implement to ensure security of their systems. There's a lot of talk about all that, and Congress is certainly aware of the need for greater protections, but the question about how to go about doing that is actually quite complicated, and there's still a lot of debate on the Hill about where Congress should go, what kind of laws Congress should pass. And again, here we see that cybersecurity is certainly not just in the realm of technicians. We need lawmakers and policymakers and other thinkers to think about these issues to come up with a good solution. These issues are complex, and we need people to be able to think about them smartly and think about the consequences of the decisions that might be made. And therefore, there's a huge role again to play for lawyers and policymakers. The last thing I want to say about why cybersecurity matters and why it's beyond the scope of just technicians is that when we're talking about cybersecurity law, we're really talking about the beginning of something, right? When we see other areas of law, in a lot of ways, those areas of law have been around for a while. They're pretty settled law. Every now and then you might get a case that changes the subject a little bit. But when we're talking about cybersecurity law, we're talking about an area of law that is really new. We're at the beginning of something here, which makes this area of law, I think, very, very exciting, because as a lawyer, getting into cybersecurity law, you really have an opportunity to shape the future. Decisions that are made today concerning cybersecurity law set precedent for the future. And there are just so many questions out there that are still unanswered about cybersecurity law and cybersecurity policy. And we want to, and as a lawyer, you'll have an opportunity to be part of that discussion if you go into cybersecurity law. Be part of that discussion and really, as I said, shape the future of where these issues should go and what kind of precedent we should be setting on these issues. And I find that very exciting. There's real tremendous opportunity here for anyone wanting to go into cybersecurity law. So those are some of the reasons why we at Maryland decided to start a cyber law program, because we saw that there is certainly a need for lawyers in this respect, and there are all these challenging issues out there when it comes to cyber law. What I'd like to do now is talk to you a little bit about our program here specifically, talk to you about what options we have for our students, and then describe some of the courses that we offer to give you an idea about what you would be learning if you decided to get into cyber law. As I said, here at the law school, we've recognized the importance of cyber law for a long time, and that's really what gave us the reason for developing the cyber law program at Maryland. And I think what we offer here is very unique, and both in terms of the academic offerings that we have, but also the opportunities for practical experience. It's always important, I think, to get both of those, both the academic and the practical experience, so that once a student graduates, they have all of that knowledge and that experience, and that they can take that into the workforce. I think I should also point out that Maryland really was one of the first law schools to develop a cyber law program, and still to this day remains a as one of the only a handful of programs in the country that offers a cyber law program. And I think that's very exciting, and certainly we're very proud of our program, and we continue to build on our program. As I said, there's a lot of open discussions still going on, so there's always we always have to think about what the latest development is and how to incorporate that into our curriculum. So for our JD students, if you enroll in Maryland law and you decide you're interested in cyber law, then in addition to obviously pursuing your JD degree, you have the option of pursuing a certificate in cyber law and crisis management at Maryland. So this is a big advantage in terms of our program, because this certificate is a Maryland Higher Education Commission approved certificate. It requires you to complete certain number of prerequisites, but once you've accomplished all of those requirements, you get a certificate in cybersecurity and crisis management law in addition to your JD degree. So what's the benefit of that? Well, once you graduate, you not only have the valuable JD degree, but you also have another credential that can demonstrate to a potential employer that you have some very specialized knowledge that is, of course, very valuable. And I think, generally speaking, it's always beneficial for a job applicant to really be able to demonstrate on paper that they have experience and specialized knowledge in a particular subject. And I think that makes a job seeker very much more attractive to a potential employer. So what do you have to do to get the certificate? Well, there are a number of core courses that you would have to take. Courses like Law and Policy of Cybersecurity, Cybercrime, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we cover in those courses in just a moment. So you take those core courses, then there's a whole list of elective courses that you can choose from. In addition to that, there's a practical experience requirement, experiential learning requirement, and that can be satisfied through an externship. We offer externships through the law school, through the Center for Health and Homeland Security, where you can gain practical experience. But other externships that are approved by the law school can also satisfy this requirement. So that would be the experiential learning piece of this. And then finally, there's a writing requirement. So you'd have to write an extensive paper on a cyber issue or a crisis management issue. And once you satisfy all those requirements, you get a certificate in cybersecurity law and crisis management. And again, I've gone into why I think that's very beneficial. And the students who have gone through this and have obtained the certificate have come back to us and said that it's been very helpful for them to have this credential that they can show. If you are an LLM student and you want to learn about cybersecurity law, then you have the option at Maryland to enroll in the LLM program and then choose a specialty program. And one of the number of specialty programs we have at Maryland is cybersecurity law. So as an LLM student, you could choose cybersecurity as your specialty program, and again, you would learn and specialize in cybersecurity law issues. So the certificate is available to JD students, and then the specialty program is available to the LLM students at Maryland. I'll talk a little bit about the courses that you would be taking if you pursued the cyber law program here at Maryland. The first and really the foundational course to the program is the Law and Policy of Cybersecurity course. And this is a survey course essentially on a whole plethora of issues in cybersecurity law. And it really covers a lot. And it's a course that gets updated every year because there are so many developments in cybersecurity that we have to make sure we're always up to date. And that's what makes the course exciting. And sometimes even in the middle of the semester, we have to change the syllabus a little bit because some big event might have happened. and that's just the nature of the area that we're studying. Something big is always happening, it seems like, and we certainly take time to analyze those events and discuss them in class. So, for example, when the Equifax breach happened just a few months ago, we took time to discuss that, took time to see what exactly happened, what this means in terms of the legal consequences, talked about what kind of lawsuits would now be emerging, what the legal theory was behind these lawsuits. We talked about policy issues, what kind of laws should Congress potentially pass now that this huge Equifax breach happened, where virtually every American's personally identifiable information was breached. This was a huge event, obviously, and there are all kinds of issues that we took time to talk about and discuss and analyze in class. So we make sure we talk about current events, but we also certainly have a list of topics that we want to discuss, some foundational knowledge when it comes to cyber law that we need to cover in our classes. So for this Law and Policy of Cybersecurity Survey course, we talk about fundamental things like roles and responsibilities in cybersecurity. What do various government agencies have to do when it comes to cybersecurity? What are their responsibilities? Similarly, what does the private sector have to do? If you're a business, what kind of standards do you have to adhere to when it comes to cybersecurity? We talk about current and proposed legislation. We take a look at the legislation that's out there already, the laws that exist, and we take a look to see if they are still applicable to cyber law and cybersecurity issues, whether or not they might need amendments. Because as you can imagine, technology moves really, really quickly. It develops very fast, and the law is sometimes a little slow to catch up. It takes a while to pass laws, to create policies. So there's this constant struggle there, and we take some time to look at these struggles in class and to see if we can come up with any kind of solution, or at least some arguments one way or another. Certainly take a look at proposed legislation as well. There's a lot of laws that get proposed on Capitol Hill or at the state level too. We take a look at some of those proposals and see what the benefits and the drawbacks what might be, and what the debate about these laws is currently. So we spend a lot of time doing that because, again, a lot of these issues are just not settled yet, and there's so much debate going on. We want to make sure that as a class and as you as a student know what the debate is, understand the debate, and then can formulate your own arguments about the debate. We take a look at executive action on cybersecurity. What is the executive branch doing? There are certainly a lot of executive orders that are coming out in both prior and current administrations when it comes to cybersecurity. We take a look at those and what they mean. We take a look at case law. There are some big cases that are being decided at all stages of the legal system. We have circuit court cases, but also a few very important Supreme Court cases that we look at. Cases that in some instances are being decided right now. So we take a look at what the arguments are, and then we talk about how we think the Supreme Court might decide those cases. And once the decision does come down from the court, we certainly analyze those decisions as well. I think they're all very exciting discussions that we have in class. As I said, the Law and Policy of Cybersecurity course is a service course, so we also take a look at other issues like the international aspects of cybersecurity. Cyberspace doesn't really know borders. It doesn't really care about borders, but the legal system certainly does. So we take a look to see how international jurisdiction and state sovereignty come into play when we're talking about cyberspace. We take a look at the issue of cyber war. Nation states are certainly building up their capabilities and in terms of cyber warfare. Nation states are able to launch cyber attacks against other nation states. So we talk about the legal framework for how that has been constructed, and what constitutes an act of war when we're talking about a cyber attack. Can a cyber attack be an act of war? These are interesting questions that we look at. So again, the law and policy of cybersecurity, that's the survey course. That's what you would start out with. We cover a lot, both in terms of the fundamentals, but also in terms of what's currently happening and what's currently being debated. Another really interesting course, very popular course that we offer here at Maryland is the Cybercrimes course. So in that course, we take a very specific look at the issue of cybercrime, which is obviously a huge issue. And we take a look at both the players in cybercrime. Who are the cyber criminals? Nation states, organized crime, certainly individual hackers. But then we ask the fundamental question also about how is cybercrime different than traditional crime? Or are they the same? Should they be treated differently? Is there a distinction between a traditional bank robbery where someone goes into a bank and steals money out of a branch? Is there a difference between that and a hacker who's able to attack hundreds, if not thousands, of banks across the world from a computer in another country? What does all that mean? There's a distinction there, it seems, but how does the law treat that distinction? And how can law enforcement really pursue those cyber criminals when, for example, the victim of the crime is here in the United States? Law enforcement wants to get at the criminal, prosecute the criminal, but what if that criminal is on the other side of the world? What can U.S. law enforcement do in that case? It's complicated, and we talk about these issues, and unfortunately, of course, this is an issue that we're seeing on a daily basis. Law enforcement is confronted with this problem on a daily basis, and we talk about the legal framework for how to approach that problem, and we talk about maybe there are ways to improve the framework. So we take time to do all that in the cybercrimes class. I think one of the reasons the cybercrime class is so popular is that we cover a lot of very hot, hot button topics that I think just lend themselves naturally to a lot of debate, and it ends up being a lot of fun in class to debate these issues because, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer to these questions. There's just good arguments to be made, good legal arguments to be made on both sides of these issues. So, for example, we take time in the cybercrime course to talk about law enforcement's authority to conduct searches of computers, of cell phones, and digital evidence in general. We talk about how the Fourth Amendment and our Fourth Amendment privacy rights apply to digital content and to our devices, and whether or not that law or that legal framework applies in the same way to digital evidence and devices as it does to more traditional evidence. So the question comes up, how does law enforcement deal with encryption, for example, when information is protected with a password where law enforcement doesn't know the password and can't crack the password? In that case, for example, can law enforcement force the owner of the device to enter the passcode to unlock the device? Can law enforcement legally force someone to do that? Or if the person who knows the passcode is not around, how can law enforcement, with a legitimate warrant, get into the device when there's a technical obstacle against doing that? There are these issues that are just very complex and very interesting to talk about, and it gives rise to questions about whether or not, again, the law needs to be changed, whether or not Congress needs to create some sort of mechanism and some sort of backdoor access to encrypted devices for law enforcement. But there's debate about those kinds of ideas, and we talk about all that in class. So I think we have very interesting debates in that class, and very interesting discussions on those issues. The last class I'll just briefly talk about is our NSA and government surveillance and, again, privacy class. This is a class that we created after the Edward Snowden revelations. There was a lot of question about government surveillance programs, and we decided we would create an entire course on these issues. And in this course, our students learn about the legal basis for a lot of the government surveillance that we now know exists. What is the legal basis? How are they legally justified? How does the Fourth Amendment constitutional rights play into all this? And how are privacy rights protected? And all of this comes in together in this NSA and government surveillance and privacy course. And again, it's a very popular course because we talk about very current issues, and issues that, again, have good arguments on both sides. There's this constant struggle between security versus privacy, and finding the right balance is difficult, and it therefore requires debate. It requires knowledge of the fundamental legal principles behind these debates, so that you as an individual can make your own well-justified arguments on these issues. The last thing I wanted to mention today is that not only does Maryland have a great cyber law program that offers both the academic expertise but also opportunities for practical experience, but Maryland as a state is also a great place to study cybersecurity and be part of the cybersecurity industry. Maryland as a state has made cybersecurity a priority. We've seen that in, again, past administrations and the current administration. Cybersecurity is something that the state of Maryland recognizes as being a priority, as being an opportunity, because of a lot of reasons. And Maryland, as you might know, is home to some of the big cybersecurity organizations in the government. NSA is home. Is home. The NSA is at home here in Maryland. We have U.S. Cyber Command here in Maryland. We also have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, here in Maryland, which sets some of these cybersecurity standards. And you might have heard about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which is a really big deal. And then we have the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence as well, which is a center that tries to match technological solutions with industry, with organizations that need those solutions. In any case, there's a lot of cyber organizations and agencies that are based here out of Maryland. So that's certainly an advantage that the state has. Of course, we're also close to the nation's capital, where federal legislation is made and policies are created. And there's just a lot of highly educated people here in Maryland. A lot of them are working on technical issues. A lot of startup companies here in Maryland, so there's always a need for people who understand cybersecurity in all its facets, certainly in the technical side, but also, again, in this legal and policy side that is becoming so critically important. Maryland as a state sometimes calls itself the epicenter for cybersecurity, and I think to a large extent that is really true because of all the resources we have here, all the great people that we have here in Maryland, and really the fact that cybersecurity is a priority here in the state. So I think the University of Maryland Carey School of Law is a great place to study cyber law because of the environment that's here within the state. I think I'll leave it at that. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I also encourage you to, of course, go to the law school's website to learn more about our programs. You'll also find my contact information there. Again, my name is Markus Rauschecker, and you can always send me an email or give me a call. I'm happy to talk to anyone who has more questions. Happy to talk to you more about the program and in general about any questions you might have. So I think we're concluded at that. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Take care. Bye.